Good morning. I'm going to show you how to make puff pastry dough. Now typically when we make the base dough, which is what we're going to do right here, we do it in a mixer and we can use a paddle attachment. Not for anything, I don't know, I just put the mixer away so I'm not taking it out. So I'm going to make a little well in the center. Actually I'm going to put this salt in here first. So I'm mixing my salt and flour together. I have bread flour and cake flour blended together. Now I'm adding the salt. This is contrary to what Wayne Gislin says in our textbook. He always says to dissolve the salt in ice water, and I must say, salt doesn't dissolve in ice water. So I've blended two kinds of flour and the salt, and what I have here is softened butter, and you can see it's very soft. So I'm just going to add the softened butter. And I'm going to use my hands to kind of blend it up into the mix, and then we're going to add ice water to this. And this is our base dough. If you remember from our lecture in our first class, we said there were 4 stages to preparing a laminated dough. Well, this is stage 1. We're preparing the base dough. So I've got the butter mixed in with the salt, 2 different types of flour, and then I'm going to weigh the water that we need. So I'm going to put this over here with my floury hands. I'm going to get the scale out. I'm going to get a bowl. I'm going to tear that bowl out, and I am going to weigh you. I have to be able to see it. 200, hang on, you got to work with me here. 282 grams of ice water. So I have water and ice cubes, and I'm going to weigh it 282. We're close. Got it. All right, 282. I'm going to get rid of the scale. I'm coming over here. I'm going to make that well we talked about in the center. Ice water has gone in, and you could use your hand. You could use a spoon, and again, as I said, you could use your mixer. The whole idea is this is a pretty soft dough that you do not want a lot of gluten development. Notice there's cake flour in here, right? And that's pretty low in protein. And the reason is, as you roll and fold this dough, you are going to be developing a lot of gluten. So they don't encourage you to develop a lot in the beginning. So all we're looking for is a somewhat smooth, soft dough. I'm pulling and pressing into the center of the dough. Once I get it there, I'm going to turn it out onto the bench, which I'm going to do right now. Scrape this our dough. This is our base dough. I don't need a lot of flour, but I just want to flatten this and get it to begin to feel like it's going to be a rectangle, which it is. I got a little piece of wet dough there. We can always fix things, people. Notice we didn't over mix this, so it's not completely smooth, which is fine, but I'm going to use my rolling pin to kind of elongate it and to get it into just a random rectangle. Now, we're doing this at home, obviously. We're using the rolling pin for the whole process. At school, we have the option of doing it with the sheeter, which is a large mechanical rolling pin. But this is good enough to get us started, okay? So it's a random initial rectangle. Eventually, this rectangle of dough is going to be the size of this piece of parchment. So what's going to happen is we're going to have our dough the size of this parchment, our butter, which is half the size of the parchment. We have our dough, our butter, and then we're going to fold this over, and that would be step 3, enclosing the lock-in. Okay, so we have our rectangle, and what we're going to do is put it on a sheet pan with a piece of parchment and some flour. I'm going to wrap it in plastic to keep it from drying out. This is going to go in the refrigerator for 20 minutes, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then we're at stage 2. So I have 500 grams of butter here, and I'm going to line them all up on a 1/4 sheet of parchment paper. So I actually took a whole sheet, cut it in half, and cut that in half again. And what my goal is to get this butter to be approximately the size of this quarter sheet. Now you say, how are you going to do that? Well, that is a great question. So I have 500 grams of butter, I have 60 grams of flour, and I have my trusty dowel. And I am going to smack at this butter until I flatten it out and get it to fit the size of this piece of parchment. So how do you do that? This is exactly how you do it. What's this flour for, the 60 grams? It's to dust on the top. You might need it all, you might not. But this is the technique. Additionally, after the butter starts to soften, you can also use your trusty dowel to roll. Now, I'm not going to make you stay here and watch this entire process, but I will come back and show you the finished product. All right, so I'm getting close. I'm dusting it with a little more flour, and you can see I haven't used all the flour. And I'm going to show you a little trick. You lay the second half over the top, and that helps with the rolling. Anything that comes outside like that, comes outside of the parchment, I'll show you how to fix in a second. So we're going to roll and roll, and we want to get this as square as possible. The squarer you get your butter, the more even your flakes. So now take your bench cutter, and wherever you've come over, you just cut that off and piece it in. It's like making a puzzle. All right, and push it, oops, cut, put that in there, flatten it. One thing that's very important to remember is the texture of the butter, when you're ready to enclose it into the dough, needs to be approximately the same texture. So this butter is getting a little bit soft just from the pounding, but we are pretty close to, let me cut this away. We're pretty close to getting this exactly where we want it. We use our paper as our measure. Stick the second one on the top, just a teeny bit more flour, and we'll finish it up with a nice sort of gentle roll to try and get it nice and even. So gently pull and all right, I feel it. I rub my hand across the top, and it's pretty much even all the way around. This is called the lock-in. This completes step 2. Hi, so I'm back with you. We're doing the puff pastry. We're making puff pastry, which is a laminated dough. This dough has been in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes. I'm going to take it off the parchment and lay it on the board. Dust it with some flour, and my goal is to roll this piece of dough up just about the size of this piece of parchment. So that's what we're aiming for. I'm going to use a rolling pin on dowels, which I know a lot of pastry chefs don't like, but I like them. This is a small one. I have a really large one, but I don't know, it's kind of heavy for me, so I like this. Now I've already extended beyond the length, so I'm gonna lift and flip, and there's always shrinkage. So notice I was too long, but now I'm not, because the dough shrinks. First time through, the dough does not have to be perfect, but we want it as close to a rectangle as we can get. Now I want to point something out about the rolling. Notice I don't do this. I don't go back and forth. I start in the middle and I pull towards me. I move it over and pull towards me. Always start in the center and go to the edges. Do not, I repeat, do not roll off the edges of your dough. If you do that, you're going to flatten them out, and your pastry dough will not be as puffy as it should. So let's take a look. Pretty good, right? Just about that size. So I'm going to make a few adjustments on the side to get this as rectangular as I can. And and I am going to take our butter, which we prepared earlier. I want you to see how can you see that fingerprint? If I push, I can push a fingerprint in it. The texture of this butter is the same as this dough, and that's really important. So the third step in the process is to enclose the lock-in. This is the lock-in, this bit of butter that I'm going to lay out. Now, a couple things. I don't want the butter oozing out, so wherever I see it hanging off the edge, I'm just gonna trim it so it doesn't come out. And I'm just gonna flatten it and make sure it's all on the inside, not coming out the outside. I'm gonna give this a little stretch and a little amen, and I'm coming over the top. I'm gonna flatten it on the sides and kind of seal in the edges. And ladies and gentlemen, we have just enclosed the lock-in, which should be approximately the size of the quarter sheet of parchment, which it is. And there you go. That is the completion of step 3. All right, back with you for step 4, which is our first roll and fold. So I've taken my rectangle and I put it lengthwise because this counter's high for me. That's why I did it. I start in the middle and I'm going to roll this out towards the edges, come back to the center and pull it towards me. The idea is to roll this as smoothly and evenly as possible. And if you look really closely, you can begin to see the butter smear through the dough, which is what we want. That's how we create the layers of flaky pastry. So we want this to be about 1.5 times the length of the parchment. So we've got a bit of a ways to go. We also, of course, need it to be wider. So I'm gonna do the width first. A little bit of flour underneath, a little bit so we don't stick. And with our rolling pin, same deal, in the center, push out, come back to the center, pull towards you. I'll show you how to fix that in a second. Whenever your rolling pin goes wonky on you, I can show you how to fix it. To fix the idea, people, is to get this as squared off as possible. And I do believe we have done that. Our initial roll looks great. And I'm hoping you can see the butter through it. Use your hand to coax it. So let me just show you size-wise. We're approximately 1.5 times, a little bit short, but pretty close, to 1.5 times the length and a little wider. So what you do now is sort of eyeball the center, make a little mark in the middle. This is your first fourfold. You take the outside and bring it to the center. Get it as squared off as you can. Take the second one, bring that one to the center, fold it over. Any excess flour, you brush off. You can use your hand, you can use a bench brush. Again, try to keep it as square as possible. And then, so we fold it in towards the center, and now we are gonna flop this over just like this. And that is our fourfold. And this is going to go back on the sheet tray, and it has to go in the refrigerator for another 10 or 15 minutes to allow the butter to cool and the dough to cool. So I think we've done our first roll and fold. How do we know?